Putin will be able to run for president of Russia again in both 2024 and 2030. The Kremlin has already started preparing for it. The Russian presidential administration plans to use all means to maximize the strengthening of Putin's regime of personal power, analysts at the Ukrainian Institute of the Future report.
The entire election agenda in the 2023-2026 cycle is and will continue to be shaped through the prism of Putin's failed Ukrainian campaign, starting with the idea that the special operation should prevent the emergence of Ukraine as anti-Russia. The Putin regime ends up building an anti-Ukraine in Russia. From an article by the Ukrainian Institute for the Future.
So, on September the 10th of this year, a single voting day is scheduled in Russia. The Russians will elect 21 governors and vote for the legislative assemblies of 16 subjects of the Russian Federation. In addition, about 6,000 municipal legislators will be elected. Russian political analysts are already saying that the campaign will take place in a new reality, and based on its results, it could become more clear which words reach the voters and which cause mistrust.
Voters have changed, times have changed. The voter makes a choice more consciously. The voter is no longer ready to get confused in abstruse phrases. He wants to get an explanation in simple and understandable terms. What are the candidate plans to do to improve the standard of living? On the one hand, this makes their choice more conscious, but on the other hand, it requires a new tone, let's call it cynical frankness, to replace the new sincerity. Evgeny Minchenko, Russian political scientist, for expert.ru.
Soldiers' mothers and widows are a category of the population that the Russian government considers a potential threat in the upcoming regional elections. Since the autumn of last year, they became the organizers of public protests. At one of the last demonstrations, residents of Tatarstan complained to officials that their husbands and sons were sent to the combat zone in Ukraine without proper equipment. They have to go on the assault practically without weapons, like cannon fodder, while the military personnel of the army in the so-called Donetsk People's Republic do not go into the very heat of it with inexperienced mobilized guys. Also mobilized from the support company are sent to the assault who initially were not even prepared for such tasks. In order to stop the dissatisfaction of this part of the electorate, the Russian authorities may begin political nomination of the women as candidates in regional elections. The appearance of candidates' mothers in the list for legislative assemblies will remove social tension and at the same time make them absolutely manageable, the experts believe.
Do you remember how there were milkmaids, weavers who were planted as deputies for the show in the Soviet Union, but they didn't decide anything. Therefore, they will play such a role as milkmaids and weavers.
The presidential elections in 2024 should be the main electoral event of the 2023-2026 cycle. It is planned that after them, the question of the transit of power will finally be closed. Putin will go to the polls as an uncontested candidate, says Zahorodny. 5 years ago, he thought about a successor, but the unsuccessful development of the war in Ukraine after the risk of military defeat marked an obvious prospect for the ruler of Russia. The guarantee of his physical survival is not in just in power, but in absolute power.
In fact, the entire political field has been cleared. There are no unnecessary people there. There are no resources to win either. The only possible way to change the events, if the decision on the elites is that they need to get rid of Putin, and you can get rid of Putin only by physically eliminating him. In dictatorships, any conversation about transit, talking, even the sorts of transiting power always leads to the stabilization of power.
If the regime is not overthrown, then the elections to the State Duma in 2026 will be held under the conditions of complete control, experts say. There is no opposition in the current parliament. There are no discussions and legislative initiatives. Russia will continue to close itself off from the whole world and degrade, Russian opposition Andrei Sidelnikov believes.
There are no elections in Russia. The institution of elections as such does not exist in the Russian Federation today, and for many years and decades. The Russian authorities can do anything. In general, they announce the so-called elections, and then they write down the results they need, which they are interested in, and this does not matter how people vote. We are well aware that all elections are reached to please the ruling elite.
Any changes in Russia are possible not as a result of elections, but only after Putin's complete removal from power due to death or a coup d'etat, Sidelnikov believes. The new system needs to be built, including the electoral legislation, and society needs to be prepared for free elections. But as long as the Putin regime is legitimate in Russia, this is impossible. Reported by Diana Kolesnik, Natalia Bilokudrя, Evgeny Karmazin, UATV News.